Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to take another look at HTML. This video is part of a larger series of videos that focuses on the introduction to HTML and to CSS. Specifically in this video, we are going to take a look at the HTML A tag. Now, the A tag can be used to create links or hyperlinks. Those links can point to local documents such as other HTML files. They can also be used to point to resources on other machines, other servers, other websites, and so on. In a later video, we are going to take a look at some additional, more advanced features of our A tag, but for this video, we are just going to see how we can use it to connect several documents together. Now, to begin with, I have created a sample HTML file using the template from Visual Studio. What we want to do is we want to add a couple of features to this document, starting with an H1 tag that simply indicates what we're going to try to do. And we're going to call this one now our Introduction to Hyperlinks. Now, our goal here is to then link this document to other documents that we've created in earlier videos, as well as other resources on the internet. And in order to do that, we need to leverage one of the attributes in the HTML tag. And the most important one, arguably, is going to be the href attribute. The href attribute is simply what indicates what your hyperlink is pointing to. So we'll start off with this and we'll look at a couple of different varieties, starting with the ability just simply to link to another website. So we'll start off here, we'll add an A tag. We pretty much have to have our href, and what we'll do is we will give the full name to the UAB website, including the protocol. So in this case, I happen to know that it's the HTTPS://, and then // and then www.uab.edu. Now, it turns out there's a couple of different ways that we can go about doing this, but we're just going to go ahead and stick with this one. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and spell out the full name of our university here. So this is the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Hopefully I can spell it correctly. And then just because we know where we're going with this, and we're going to do several of them, I'm going to go ahead and add my BR tag on the end. That technically, that BR tag is completely optional, and we can additionally put these hyperlinks inside of a paragraph or inside of other elements. But again, we're just going to keep this one pretty simple, and we'll simply go ahead and launch our web browser with this page here, this site, and we can select now that hyperlink. And provided that we have it correct, a little bit of a delay there, apologize for that. I'm not really sure what's going on with my internet there, but there you go. You've got now our web page. Now, what we can do is we can do this a number of different ways. And so to give you some examples here, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Wikipedia page for HTML. And I happen to sort of have one planned for us here already, and that we can go straight to the HTML page itself. And so we'll start with this one. We'll just simply copy and paste this particular hyperlink. And again, we can come back over here to our sample document. I'm going to go ahead and add another A and then an href. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and paste that URL. You can see that even though it wasn't visible in the address bar, we get the prototype as well as the fully qualified name there to the resource or the URL. And we're going to go ahead and close that. And again, what you put here in between these A tags is what the user sees, as we saw in this first example. And so in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and put Wikipedia. And then how about if we just go ahead and specify that this is the HTML page. And again, I like to put Wikipedia there, just to indicate then what the target source, the target destination is. In other words, that you know where you're going. And again, we're going to go ahead and add our BR tag. Now, sometimes you will see something along these lines where we have a href and we'll just simply paste the URL in, but then also you'll follow this up with the URL. And again, not really sure why my syntax highlighting is a little bit off here. This should be perfectly fine, making sure that my double quotes and everything are there. This is just Visual Studio syntax highlighting. But then what we can do is we can simply go back now to our page one more time, back And you can see I've already got all of these links here. In this case, I've got that special or that more custom, cleaner, however you want to think of this link, points to our Wikipedia HTML, or I can simply use the URL itself. Again, it just depends on what you want the user to see. So you've got a couple of different possibilities there. Now, taking this a step further, let's say I wasn't just interested in the entire article, the entire HTML article, but instead what I wanted to do is I wanted to focus on maybe a subsection in this article. And let's say for specifics here, that I was interested in the attributes subsection. And you'll notice that with Wikipedia, if I navigate with the left menu, I go to the section in the document. And what I'd like to do is I'd like for us to be able to provide a link directly to the attributes section of the HTML page. And the easiest way to do this is to inspect the element or look at the code behind to figure out exactly what the ID for this particular element is. And so the idea is now that I'm going to take this ID and I'm going to include it in the URL in a way such that it navigates directly to this section in the document. So now going back to Visual Studio, I'm actually going to just simply copy and paste my second link because it's going to be pretty close to this. And I'm going to add then the # and the ID for the element that I want to navigate to. In this case, it's going to be attributes. I do want to take just a second to make sure that I have spelled it correctly. And in fact, yes, I did. And now what I'd like to do is go back to Visual Studio one more time. And I want to somehow indicate that this link is in fact separate. So we'll have then our HTML attributes link. Again, we're going to save it. Let's make sure that we have a BR tag here. You can experiment with this and you can see what happens if you don't use the BR tag. You'll effectively just get all of your hyperlinks going horizontal on the page. Again, it depends on what you want this to look at. In later videos, we could take a look at how to put hyperlinks inside of tables and inside of other elements. But again, we're just trying to keep this one relatively simple. Now I'm going to refresh my page and you'll see that now I have an HTML attributes link. And I click on that, and you'll notice that I'm not going to the HTML landing page, if you would, or to the top of the page, but rather I'm going straight to the attributes section on the HTML page on the Wikipedia site. Now, that shows you how to connect to remote resources. In other words, another server, another web server, another web page. What we'd like to do is we'd like to see how we can link local documents. And fortunately, it's not too terribly different. We'll just simply come back over here now to our document one more time in Visual Studio. And let's take a second to clean this up now. We're actually going to go ahead and put another header in here. And how about if we use this, we say, excuse me, remote resources. We'll group it this way. And then for the second one, for this H2 here, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to group this one now as local resources. And again, this technique is very similar. You'll see in just a second that we will have our A tag, and then we have our href attribute. And if you noticed earlier in the video, as soon as I hit the equal sign and the double quotes, I actually got prompted with some suggestions for targets for this hyperlink. Now you'll recognize these names, these arguably very poor names, but these names from the HTML files from our earlier videos. And in this case, it doesn't really matter which document that I pick. Probably wouldn't make sense for us to reference ourselves. In other words, this is sample_05, although technically you can go about doing that. And in a later video, I'll show you a couple of tricks that you can do to actually do some self-referencing. But in this case, let's just pick a sample document. In other words, another one other than what we've been working on, and we'll just pick our sample_04.html. Now, I realize you may not be using Visual Studio and your IDE may not support this feature, so you simply just need to make sure and spell the name of the file correctly, including the file extension. And at this point, you close your A tag, and you can put whatever you want to in the description here. So this is the part, this is the friendly part that the user sees. And so I'm just going to put in sample_04. I'm going to drop the .html again for a little bit of variety. And again, we'll want to go ahead and add our BR tag. and we'll see if we need to do any cleanup here. Again, there's a number of different ways that we can group these A tags, including putting them inside of a paragraph. Now we'll come back over here. I'm going to go to back button. If you'll notice now I have my two H2 level headers as well as my H1 level header. And now I have my local resources, and I can simply click on the hyperlink for sample underscore 04. And I actually have to go back and verify and make sure that I have anything in sample underscore 04. It looks like for whatever reason that this document may in fact actually not have anything in there. And I didn't mean to do that. I thought I was linking to something that had something in it. I'll have to go back and see what happened to that. I must not have saved it correctly. So tell you what, let's link this to a different document here. We'll just go back to our sample underscore 03. Hopefully that one actually has something in there, just so that we can prove to ourselves that we're actually accomplishing something. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this one more time. And there we go. There's our sample from an earlier video. We were looking at the different types of demonstrating, different ways of demonstrating tags that are related to text. Now, let's say I wanted to take this concept just a step further, and maybe we wanted to group our web pages in subfolders. You can only imagine that as we start building more and more pages, that this is going to get very confusing. You can end up with a few hundred HTML files if you aren't careful. And maybe you wanted to start grouping them a little differently, maybe based on a department, maybe based on a project. Doesn't really matter exactly how you want to group them, but what we would want to do is be able to navigate from one HTML page in one folder to an HTML page in another folder. And so what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to come out here on my file system, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. And again, what you call this doesn't really matter too much. I'm just going to call this subcategory. And again, you can probably make this a little shorter. This is a little longer. This was just the best idea that came to my mind. And then in that subcategory folder, what we want to do is we want to go back to Visual Studio, and we simply want to create now a new HTML file. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control N, open a new HTML file. And what we're going to call this is going to be child. In other words, it's going to indicate this is a page, a child page, and we're going to call this one child underscore 01. And as far as the body of the HTML file, it doesn't really matter too much what you put in there. Just put something in there that indicates there's some content, unlike what we saw earlier where we just had a blank page. And I'm just going to say this is an example child page. Now, the idea here is that I want to be able to see how I can relate this page with our earlier page. And you can see here, I'm going to go to my introduction to HTML and CSS folder. I'm going to go into the subcategory folder, and I'm going to call this one child underscore 01. Again, the names aren't very important. It's more of the concept. And we're going to go ahead and save this. Now, what we'll do is we'll go back to the original sample underscore 05. We're going to add now another href, and in this case we won't be able to pick them directly from this folder, but we can pick the URL, at least in Visual Studio, and what you'll see is I can now see the subcategory subfolder, and you can see that child underscore 01.html. Now I realize to some extent I'm cheating here, so we want to take a second and actually look at what we've done here. You'll notice that I'm effectively just using the subfolder name followed by the slash and then the name of the HTML file, in this case child underscore 01.html. I close my tag, and in this case I'm again going to keep the same pattern of simply using just the name of the file, not the extension, for the visible part of the link. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this. We're going to go back to our web browser one more time. We'll back once again, and you'll see that I now have my child underscore 01 link. And if I click on it, you'll note that it goes to the example child page. And I can zoom in a little bit here in case the text is too small for you. But you'll also notice here, and I'm going to do this one more time so you can see it. You see my entire path up here. And again, it's a little hard to read. That was somewhat intentional. You can see here that buried in here is our introduction to HTML and CSS. and then our sample underscore 05. So pay very close attention to this address or this portion of the address in the address bar, so that when I click on my child underscore 1, you'll see that you still have this portion of the path, but you've added to it with the subcategory in the child underscore 01.html. Now, you'll see that effectively all we're doing is we're navigating the file system, except we are using our web browser instead of our file explorer or our Finder. Now, this brings us to our last question for this video, and that is, how do we make it back from this page? Well, it's pretty clear that you can use your browser back button, but let's say that we didn't want to do that for any number of reasons. And so what we would like is we'd like the ability to be in the child page and somehow get back to a home or landing page or a parent. Now, for this particular example, I'm going to link this child page back to our sample underscore 05. And ideally, what we would have done is we would have named that file a little bit better. Maybe we would have called it home.html or even parent.html. But for right now, we're going to stick with the name sample underscore 05.html. What I'm going to do then is inside of our child underscore 01.html, I'm going to add another A tag, another href, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the name of the page that I want to navigate back to. And in this case, to get to the parent directory, we have to use 2 dots followed by the slash. And in this case, we're going to put in our sample underscore 05.html. Notice here that the file name has to have the extension here, and the path is the relative path, not the absolute path. In other words, basically, it's relative to where we are on the file system. In this case, once again, we are in the folder subcategory. We are using or loaded the child underscore 01.html, and we effectively want to go up a directory, and we want to open this sample underscore 05.html. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to simply call this home, and we're going to go ahead and save it. And then what we can do is we can go back to our browser. We can simply refresh this child page, and you'll see that I now have the home hyperlink, and the home hyperlink will take us back then to our introduction to hyperlinks. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, there are a lot of different possibilities. There's no way in the world I could cover all of them in a single video, but this gives you now the ability to navigate between pages, both remotely and locally. And what we'll do in later videos is we'll take a look at other features, including being able to load images, launch your email client, and a number of other things as far as controlling the behavior of your web browser. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you for watching.